Mental, represented, and implementation models. It's a grand-sounding title for something that's actually going to be quite straightforward and simple, but yet really, really important. So implementation model versus mental model. We'll look at those two, and then we'll think about the represented model and the role that it plays. If we're thinking about software and how we create it, well, we typically use algorithms, we'll use data, we can package those up into classes. There may be other components that talk to one another. And from the developer's point of view, that's how they think about how they represent their particular piece of software. That's the implementation model. It describes how the software works. There's a trap here that if you take the implementation model and you think, okay, that's going to form the basis on which I will create my interface with the user, that is completely wrong. It's suboptimal, it's dangerous, it's likely to end up potentially confusing the user, and it's approaching things from completely the wrong direction. It's really important that whenever we're thinking about interface design, that our starting point is the user's mental model, how the user is likely to think about, to conceptualize, to view the whatever type of task they want to do. That must be our starting point, and we have to build our interface around that, not the implementation model. And certainly, maybe in our case, because we are all developers and we have that background, that can be a more challenging perspective. It's almost easier if you're a bit more distant and more removed and working very closely with the users all of the time. Ultimately, the things have to come together, but the right starting point for interface design is with the user and their particular mental model or models. So that's where the represented or the conceptual model comes in. That is how software, how it appears to act, how it appears to behave, how we choose to present it to the user. So it's how the designer chooses to present behavior and functionality. It doesn't actually have to reflect the implementation model. The implementation model is however it's implemented. The represented model is how it presents itself to the user. And they can be different. And in some cases, they should be different. Really important that the represented model is the one that maps onto the user's mental model, because that means then that they'll be able to use it quite easily and quite straightforwardly. Typically, generally as well, it's good that the represented model is more simple than the implementation model. Generally, we want to do this. We may implement it in a particular way, but any part of the implementation that doesn't align with the user's mental model, we want to hide. We want to make it invisible from the user's point of view. We almost want to design it out of the interface. So it's a really, really key point in terms of us thinking about how we represent the piece of software, mapping onto the user's mental model, whilst also then still avoiding any of the underlying complicated bits of the implementation model. Let's give you a couple of examples that of how this can be done, how it can be done effectively. And a really, really good way of doing it is through the use of previews, or of showing the user what the consequence of something would be, or providing them information that more closely aligns with what they're thinking about. And I've got a couple of examples here. On this screen, you can see the two images looking at font selection. And then in the next screen, we're going to look at preview for parameters inside an image editing package. But let's start off first of all looking at fonts. So we've got two examples here, and in one case on the left hand side you can see all the list of the fonts, and that's a parameter from the programming point of view. It needs to know, okay, so what font does the user want to use? I have those labeled by name. It could be Times New Roman, it could be Arial, and I'm going to present the list so the user can check and choose the font they want to. So that's implementation point of view. We have a list of fonts, we need the user to tell us the one they want to have. Brilliant. From the user's point of view, they generally are interested in selecting a font that has a certain look, a certain style to it. That is very often a reason why people pick something. It may be that they've been told, okay, for this it must be Arial, and then they're just picking the name. very often beyond that, they're picking something that has the right visual appearance for the role that they have. So if you look at the list on the right hand side, that's just a list of all of the fonts that are available. And fair enough, from the implementation point of view, well, we've showed the user, they can pick the one they want. From the user's point of view, that list isn't particularly helpful because it assumes that for Lucidia Bright or Lucidia Console, they know how those fonts will differ. And if they select it, how it will appear, and have to be able to mentally imagine how it's going to appear, and then to be able to mentally imagine, does that meet the needs of what I want to go for? And if they don't know how it's going to appear, that's just a source of confusion. Maybe it's perfect, maybe it's not. And I don't want to get the user into a situation where they're clicking on things in the hope that it's okay. And we've also highlighted the need to reduce mental cognitive load on the user and having to get them to remember how something looks and to then mentally do a compare and contrast to say, is that how I would like it to look based on my needs? That's mental effort that we do not want to subject our users to. Over on the left hand side, well, we show in the list, but we show in the list using the actual font that we have that is associated with that list item. So it's more work for the developers in terms of doing this, sure, but from the user's point of view, it's fantastic because we are highlighting then what the fonts are and how they look. And you can also see we've done a little bit extra because we've highlighted things which are commonly used or recently used, and that helps then the user just focus in on those most common ones or have a longer list they can scroll through looking for something else. Another example then is the use here. This is an exposure control or any sort of control really inside, for example, an image editing package, but it applies very much more broadly. In the example we have over on the left hand side, all we've done here is we said, okay, so we have a particular algorithm. That algorithm takes in a bunch of parameters. Well, we need those parameters from the user so we can run the algorithm. So I'm just going to ask the user, okay, well, what black level do you want to have? What exposure level do you want to have? How do you want to combine these ones? What's going to be the mode? All of those types of things. Now, for a user who has, in this case, exposure, who has run exposure many, many times and can very easily sort of visualize, oh yes, I know I want to do this, and here's the parameter that does that. They're more or less experts. They might then be able then to plug in the values that have worked for them in the past. For the vast majority of other users, and absolutely including beginning users, this is going to appear to be just a bunch of parameters, and they're likely then to tweak one, to change it, to run the thing, to see if that sort of meets what they want. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Go back to change something else, maybe changing things at random just to find the look that they're looking for. It's tedious, it's cognitively more demanding, it's not a great user experience. The example we see on the right hand side is one that is very much more designed around how the user approaches it. The user has a certain, certainly for images, a certain shape, color, display that they have in their mind, how they want it to appear. So in this sense then we're showing a number of different filters and we're showing them for different sort of filter presets, and we're giving a thumbnail representation so the user can look at them and sort of narrow in the specific ones that may meet their particular needs. So again, it's more work for the developer, but from the user's point of view, it's that much more user friendly. So ideally, these are the types of things we want to do. We want to think about what is important from the user. What does that user want to do? And how do we, through our interface, present, display, and show things that map onto the user's expectations as closely as possible. And that means we have to do extra work to hide some of the implementation specific elements. Well, let's do that work. It's going to be effort well spent. So overall takeaway in this here, when designing an interface, as said many times, the focus first and foremost should be on the user. That's who we're thinking about. That's who we are designing the interface to support, to interact with. The implementation model is whatever the implementation model is, and that's then what we have to provide, the bridging between the interface and the implementation model. And even that means that we have to do a bit of extra work. Well, we have to do a bit of extra work. And it's really important that if we have an understanding of the implementation model, that we're careful that doesn't creep too much into the interface. We always keep it cleanly and closely based on what the user is expecting. So that's all we want to look at inside this section. In the next section, we're going to go on to introduce and have a look at the idea of affordance.